Welcome back to your CPA Quick Review. Today we're going to answer one of the biggest questions on the CPA exam, held for use versus held for sale. This one decision determines almost every impairment rule that follows. Before you calculate anything, stop and ask yourself one question. Is the company keeping this asset, or is it selling this asset? If the company is keeping the asset, you are in the held for use model. If the company plans to sell the asset, you are in the held for sale model. Once you answer that question, almost every other rule becomes much easier. Let's start with held for use. Think of this as the company continuing to use the asset in its operations. Since the company expects to recover the asset through its use, the CPA exam wants you to ask one simple question. Can this asset recover its carrying value through its expected future cash flows? That's why the first step is called the recoverability test. Compare the carrying value to the undiscounted future cash flows. If the undiscounted future cash flows are at least equal to the carrying value, stop. The asset is recoverable and there is no impairment. If the undiscounted future cash flows are less than the carrying value, the asset is impaired. Now move to step 2. Compare the carrying value to fair value. The impairment loss equals carrying value minus fair value. After recording the impairment, continue depreciating or amortizing the new carrying amount over the remaining useful life. Under US GAAP, impairment losses for assets held for use can never be reversed. Remember, the company is recovering the asset by using it, so we care about future cash flows. Now let's switch to held for sale because everything changes. Here, the company is no longer using the asset. Instead, it plans to recover its value by selling it. Before you even think about impairment, make sure the asset qualifies as held for sale by meeting all 5 of the following criteria. Management must be committed to selling it. The asset must be available for immediate sale in its current condition. The sale must be probable and generally expected within 1 year. The asset must be actively marketed at a reasonable price, and it must be unlikely that management changes its plan. Once those criteria are met, forget everything you just learned about the recoverability test. There are no undiscounted future cash flows. Instead, simply measure the asset at the lower of carrying value or fair value less cost to sell. If carrying value is higher, record the impairment loss immediately. Then stop depreciating or amortizing the asset because it is no longer being used. Unlike held for use assets, impairment losses for held for sale assets may be restored if fair value later increases, but only up to the amount of the previous write-down. Notice something? Held for sale never asks about future cash flows because the company isn't planning to recover the asset through use anymore. They're planning to recover it by selling it. The good news is that these held for sale rules don't just apply to property, plant, and equipment. Finite life intangible assets that qualify as held for sale follow these same rules. Measure them at the lower of carrying value or fair value less cost to sell. Stop amortization once they are classified as held for sale, and restoration is allowed, but only up to the amount of the previous impairment loss. Now let's compare the 2 models side by side. Held for use asks one question. Can the asset recover its carrying value through its expected future cash flows? That's why you perform the recoverability test using undiscounted future cash flows. If the asset fails, compare carrying value to fair value, continue depreciation or amortization after impairment, and never reverse the impairment loss. Held for sale skips the recoverability test completely. Instead, measure the asset at the lower of carrying value or fair value less cost to sell. Stop depreciation or amortization because the asset is being sold, not used. If fair value later increases, you may restore the impairment loss, but never above the amount of the original write-down. Here's the memory trick that I hope sticks with you on exam day. If you're using the asset, think future cash flows. If you're selling the asset, think selling price. That one sentence will help you answer a huge number of impairment questions. If you remember only one thing from this review, remember this. Before solving any impairment question, Don't ask what formula to use. Ask whether the company is using the asset or selling the asset. If you are using the asset, think future cash flows. If you are selling the asset, think selling price. That one decision determines almost every impairment rule that follows.